It's been over 2 decades since Fred Rogers, beloved host of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, passed away. In that time, his reputation has only grown. He's become more than a children's television host. He's a cultural icon, a symbol of decency, kindness, and compassion in an increasingly cynical world. His words, "Won't you be my neighbor?" still echo in the hearts of those who grew up with his calm voice and cardigan sweaters. But now, 20 years after his death, his family has begun to speak candidly about the man behind the myth. And what they've revealed complicates, and in some ways, contradicts the universally adored image of Mr. Rogers. It's not scandalous in the way tabloids hunger for, but it is emotionally raw, deeply human, and at times unsettling. Truth, as they tell it, is not pretty. It's complex. The mask of perfection Fred Rogers cultivated an image of serenity. On screen, he was unfailingly gentle, patient, and morally anchored. He talked to children about difficult subjects, death, divorce, race, war, with rare grace. To many, he wasn't just a TV host. He was a surrogate parent, a teacher of values, a spiritual guide. But perfection is a heavy burden to carry, especially for those closest to the person being idealized. His son, John Rogers, now in his 60s, broke the family's long silence during a recent sit-down conversation. "The world got Mr. Rogers," he said quietly. "We got Dad, and those were not always the same person." According to John, the father he knew was loving but distant, kind but demanding, generous but emotionally removed. He was never cruel, John clarified. But he was unreachable. He lived in the sacred mental space where everything had to be calm. And if you disrupted that calm, even unintentionally, it was like you had shattered something. For a child, growing up in that kind of environment wasn't always peaceful. It was sometimes painfully silent. Life inside the neighborhood. Fred Rogers' wife, Joanne, who passed away in 2021, reportedly once described their household as carefully managed. In private letters the family has recently decided to share, she wrote of Fred's constant striving to maintain spiritual balance, often at the expense of genuine emotional expression. He couldn't tolerate yelling, one letter reads. Not just arguments, any strong emotion unsettled him. "We had to learn to process everything quietly, even grief." This emotional distance, the family suggests, wasn't intentional cruelty. Rather, it was a byproduct of Fred's extreme sensitivity, something that made him so attuned to children's needs on camera, but less equipped to handle the mésances of real family life. His niece, Laura Rogers, recalled visiting there. "Home as a child, you couldn't be loud. You couldn't roughhouse. You always had to be appropriate. It was like living inside a museum dedicated to emotional restraint." She added, with affection but candor, he loved deeply. "I don't doubt that. But he didn't always know how to show it in real time. His love came through rules, through structure. Not hugs. Faith, discipline, and the pressure to be good." Fred Rogers was a devout Presbyterian minister. His faith was central to his worldview and to the moral universe of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. But that faith, his family says, came with its own set of difficulties. He had an almost impossible standard for himself, John said. He believed he had a calling not just as a TV personality, but as a moral example. And if he ever felt he had fallen short, even in the smallest way, he would torment himself. That pressure, John explained, radiated outward. Family members weren't just expected to behave, they were expected to embody the same quiet grace. Fred did. That included always being polite, never raising your voice, and never revealing pain or anger in a public setting. We weren't allowed to be messy humans. We were Rogerses. John described long conversations at the dinner table, in which Fred would gently correct behavior or suggest more neighborly ways to express oneself. Over time, the corrections accumulated into a sense that real feelings were unwelcome. It was like living with a lighthouse, John said. Always shining, always watching. And you started to feel like you had to be made of stone. The cost of being a saint. The public adoration for Fred Rogers only intensified over the years. From documentaries to dramatized films, he's been canonized as a saintly figure. But that canonization, his family says, came at a cost, not just to their private lives, but to Fred himself. He hated being idolized, Wavra said, but he also feared letting people down. It crushed him to think that someone might feel disappointed by him even for a second. This, they believe, led him to suppress many parts of himself, even harmless ones. He avoided sarcasm. He never gossiped. He didn't dance, didn't drink, and rarely indulged in spontaneous fun. He was sincere to a fault, John added. He didn't know how to loosen up. Joy for him was structured like a scheduled puppet segment, not a spontaneous belly laugh. Over time, the perfection became isolating. According to letters and family accounts, Fred struggled in silence, with feelings of loneliness even in the presence of those who loved him. He gave the world so much, Lavra said. But sometimes I wonder if he saved any joy for himself. Why speak now? For years, the family chose silence. They didn't want to tarnish his memory or confuse the public image of a man who had brought so much good into the world. But now, 2 decades later, they say the silence has become its own kind of lie. We're not doing this to attack him, John explained. We're doing it because we loved him. And loving someone means telling the truth, even when it's complicated. The family hopes their honesty will add depth to Fred Rogers' legacy, not diminish it. He wasn't perfect. He was principled. There's a difference. And I think that difference makes his kindness more meaningful. Not less, Lavra said. Public reaction, a divide predictably. The public response to the family's revelations has been mixed. Some longtime fans are deeply unsettled by the idea that Fred Rogers wasn't the idealized father figure they imagined. Others have expressed gratitude. I don't need Mr. Rogers to be perfect. One social media post read, I need him to be real. If he struggled but still chose kindness, that makes him more heroic, not less. Psychologists and cultural critics have also weighed in, praising the family for shedding light on the emotional complexity of moral icons. We live in a time that craves role models. One commentator said, but we've confused goodness with perfection. Fred Rogers was good, but he was also a man with limitations. Recognizing that helps us find grace for ourselves too. A legacy re-examined. Fred Rogers' legacy is secure, but it's evolving. What the family has opened is not a scandal, but a conversation. A conversation about how we define kindness, about the cost of emotional perfectionism, and about the difference between public personas and private truths. His family doesn't want statues or sainthood. They want understanding. They want others to know that behind the camera was a man who tried, sometimes too hard, to be everything for everyone. And in doing so, may have forgotten how to just be. He taught people to love themselves, John said. But I'm not sure he ever fully gave himself that same permission. Final thoughts. 20 years after his death, Fred Rogers still stands as a beacon of gentle wisdom. But the new revelations from his family cast a more nuanced light on that. Beacon not to dim it, but to show that it was held by human hands. He wasn't flawless. He wasn't always emotionally available. He struggled, he strained, and sometimes he failed. And maybe that's the real lesson we can learn from him. Now, not just to be kind, but to allow kindness to begin with honesty, even when the truth isn't pretty.